Children feature a lot in Iranian cinema. In some films, like Asghar Farhadi's A Separation, they are observers, forced to witness the situation spiral out of control. Many cataclysmic scenes close with one of the daughters' reactions. Confused, distraught, desperate for peace, their reactions are often the only thing that make much sense. While Farhadi avoids moralizing in his films, in fact, he is known for his democratic cinema, focusing on the daughter's reactions remind us that, at the very least, this is not a scene for a child. And yet, unfortunately, here we are. In Kiarostami's 10, Amin is an emblem of patriarchal values. He is the seed of a man ready to oppress, raging at his mother for causing his parents' divorce. But we can see that no one truly wins here by how deeply uncomfortable and aggressive he is. He's crawling out of his own skin. And it's a pretty remarkable performance by real-life mother and son. In other films like Where is the Friend's Home, Children of Heaven, and The Day I Became a Woman, classics from Iranian cinema's second new wave, children bravely navigate a world where adults are completely unhelpful, if not malevolent, then neglectful. Both due to strict censorship laws and Sufi poeticism, Iranian cinema is full of allegory, and the children here represent all Iranians navigating a harsh new post-revolution world, which transformed basically overnight from a secular authoritarian monarchy to a repressive theocratic government. I only knew a little bit about Iranian history before starting this deep dive into its cinema. I won't be getting too much into the history here, but I've left some resources in the comments below. Persepolis in particular is a beautifully animated timeline of events of the revolution. It's based on the life of Marjane's Satrapi, who first penned the graphic novel and then translated it to film. So I began reading and watching, and literally a few days later, a 22-year-old woman, Mahsa Amini, was arrested for not wearing her headscarf correctly and died in custody. Her tragic death sparked protests all over Iran that are still ongoing and have resulted in over 200 deaths so far, including children and teenagers like Sarina Ismailzadeh and Nika Shakarami, which is so awful and difficult to comprehend. Many seem to think that this time is different, that there's no turning back from the rage and fury that's visible on the streets right now, and it's really because of the incredibly brave youth that are spearheading the protests. Girls are demanding rights they have never been able to enjoy, and they're reclaiming their bodily autonomy from a repressive regime. In pre-revolutionary Iran, children were considered adults when they reached the age of 18. In the Islamic Republic of Iran, however, this age shifted to the age of puberty, defined as 15 years old for boys and 9 years old for girls. No doubt this was a jumping off point for many filmmakers, feeling the need to explore what happens to childhood, what happens to humans as a result of this sped up loss of innocence. Marzieh Meshkini puts forward her best guess in The Day I Became a Woman, which combines 3 short stories about women at different stages of their life. If interpreted as the same woman, it reveals just how difficult it is to reclaim autonomy and freedom later on in life when the path to equality diverges at such a young age. It's so clear in this film how childhood and feminism are intrinsically linked. Khomeini considered Iranians who marry around the age of puberty as ideal, and those who wait until later as acting in defiance of both national and religious law. He said it is highly recommended that a girl be married off as soon as she reaches the age of puberty. One of the blessings of man is to have his daughter experience her first period, not in her father's house, but in that of her husband. The impact of a society that sees women primarily as reproductive caregivers to be passed around by men is clear. Their ability to participate in civil society is limited. Their mental health is impacted, and it viciously perpetuates a culture that condones violence against women, physically, emotionally, and structurally. We see this in the final scene of Story 2, spoiler alert here. Despite our main character's continued defiance, fiercely riding her bike past various man-made obstacles, she doesn't win. Conditioned by Hollywood and happy endings, I expected the woman wearing headphones to turn around and help our main character defeat the baddies, but it's simply not realistic, and instead her tiny silhouette just fades further and further into the distance. We see it in 10, how a traumatic childhood for anyone, filled with confusion, fear, and the expectation to act like an adult, only adds to the inability to break this patriarchal cycle. Amin constantly belittles his mother and has a total disregard for her happiness and freedom.
من الان شادابم. من الان مثل یه رودخونه در جریانم. اون موقع باطلاق بوگندویی بودم که خراب بودم. مغزم فاسد شده بود. سه جمله گفتی زیادی حرف زدی و دروغ بود حرفت و این حرفو من نخواهم قبول. چرا دروغ بود؟ من حرفو نخواهم قبول. چرا دروغ بود؟ حرفو نخواهم قبول. بذاری که شما میخوای بگی که تمام این حرفا چرت و پرتات واسه اینه که بگی که من درست بود طلاقم بابات و بابا میخوام فکر کنی که اصلا غلط بود. برای من درست بود. خوشحالی به خاطر فقط به فکر خودت.
But I believe Kiarostami wants us to feel for both characters here, and especially as someone whose parents divorced around the same age, it stood out to me how much pressure is on this child. He clearly has his father in his ear, society, law, and God, no less, telling him how a woman should act. And he has a mother who desperately wants her son to be different by constantly challenging his views and shaming him when he doesn't understand. There's no room for empathy, there's no room for growth, there's no room for innocence. It's just a constant barrage of stress. We see it not just in the themes, but integrated into the filmmaking techniques and stylistic language of Iranian cinema, which has a way of utilizing space unlike anything I've ever seen. But it's often men that have complete access to the world. In The Wind Will Carry Us, we follow Behzad for the entire film, running from one point of town to the other. It's beautiful because the town is so unique. It's full of pathways that become hidden nooks, that become ladders and rooftops. But there seems to be a time or spatial limit to where women are allowed. This is represented by the countdown stick in The Day I Became a Woman.
وقتی دیدی که سایه نداره دیگه زهره باید سر زور بیایی خونه یا این رو سری تر کن برو خدا همراه برو عزیزم.
Shooting on location was also a good way for Iranian filmmakers to get around censorship laws. Women must be shown wearing their veil at all times on screen, which they wouldn't normally do in the comfort of their own homes. So many filmmakers chose to depict women in outdoor settings, where it was more conceivable that they would be wearing their hijab. Cars are perhaps the perfect middle ground, a combination of private and public life, and you see them a lot in Iranian cinema, portrayed in such a dramatically distinct way to the car chase scenes of Hollywood. Conversations can be more intimate in a car than they would be out in the world, especially for women. But there's still a constant reminder that the external world exists through traffic, noises, pedestrians, other drivers, and at some point our characters will have to face reality. Filmmaker Mohsen Makhmalbaf described Iranian cinema as being caught between poetry and censorship, which is an interesting liminal space that has clearly inspired pretty incredible creativity. When asked whether the humanitarianism of his films is attributable to the influence of religion, Majidi, Children of Heaven director, answered by referencing the tradition of the Sufi poets. Our literature is very rich with poets such as Hafiz, Saadi, Rumi. In their writings, these poets have always given a great importance to the human being. All of this combines to make a very unique type of cinema, one which has had a spirit of protest right at its core for decades, with children leading the charge. There's no flashy effects, no fast cars. Filmmakers hone in on a small, intimate story that speaks to wider issues, because they must. It's meditative, empathetic, and visually gorgeous, but it's also an act of defiance in a system that strips people of their human rights. Just this year, award-winning filmmaker Jafar Pahani was ordered to serve a 6-year prison sentence. He'd been arrested before in 2010 for propaganda against the system and was barred from leaving Iran and making films, largely confined to his own home for the past 12 years. These filmmakers are brave, and so are the children that they depict. In Where Is My Friend's Home and Children of Heaven, the kids are left to fend for themselves entirely. Adults often cause the overarching issue and then make the situation worse by imposing strict rules and threats of punishment. But through resourcefulness, communication, empathy, and determination, and at times defying authority, they make a better world for themselves and their loved ones. In the final scene of A Separation, spoiler alert here, Nader and Simin wait outside while Terme decides who she wants to live with. Before, there was just glass and shadows between them. Farhadi ingeniously uses windows and foreground objects in their apartment to give a sense of obscured truth and growing rifts between characters. But now there is a wall, a clear separation. Perhaps we should look at the 2022 protests like this. There's no going back for Iranians, and just like Terme, hopefully it's the youth that get to have the final say on what their future will look like.